It was a moonless night when I found myself driving down that infamous street. The locals called it Hollow Lane, and its reputation as a haunted road had always intrigued me. I had heard countless tales about it, but like any skeptic, I dismissed them as mere superstitions. However, that night, I was about to experience something that would forever change my beliefs. The darkness was absolute as I turned onto Hollow Lane. The gnarled branches of ancient trees stretched over the narrow road, their twisted forms casting eerie shadows that danced in the dim glow of my headlights. The air felt thick with a chilling unease as I ventured further down the desolate path. As I drove deeper into the heart of Hollow Lane, the atmosphere grew increasingly oppressive. The stillness of the night was interrupted only by the occasional hoot of an owl or the distant rustle of leaves in the wind. It was as though the very earth beneath me held its breath, waiting for something to happen. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, that unseen eyes followed my every move. Goosebumps prickled my skin as I glanced nervously at the rearview mirror, half expecting to see a shadowy figure lurking in the back seat. But there was nothing there, just the empty darkness. My heart raced as I approached an old, decrepit bridge that spanned a narrow creek. Its wooden planks creaked ominously beneath my tires, adding to the eerie ambience. I knew the stories, tales of a phantom bride who had met her tragic end on this very bridge, forever haunting anyone who dared cross it. I scoffed at the idea but couldn't help feeling a shiver run down my spine. Just as I reached the middle of the bridge, my headlights flickered and died, plunging me into total darkness. Panic gripped me as I struggled to regain control of the car, my hands trembling on the steering wheel. I fumbled for my phone, using its feeble light to guide me. That's when I heard it, a soft, mournful whisper that seemed to emanate from the very walls of the bridge. "Help me," it pleaded, the voice quivering with sorrow. I froze, my heart pounding in my chest. It couldn't be real, I thought, just a trick of the mind in this pitch-black darkness. But the voice persisted, growing louder and more desperate. "Please, help me," it cried, now sounding as if it were right beside me. I couldn't see anything, but I felt a presence, an icy breath on the back of my neck. Terrified, I fumbled to start the car. The engine roared to life, and my headlights flickered back on, revealing the empty bridge before me. I wasted no time and accelerated out of there, my tires screeching against the worn wood. I was shaken, but I told myself it was a strange, but explainable, occurrence. Perhaps an animal had made those sounds, or my imagination had run wild in the darkness. I was determined to prove to myself that there was nothing paranormal about Hollow Lane. As I continued down the road, I noticed something peculiar. A dense fog had rolled in, obscuring my vision. It was so thick that I could barely see a few feet ahead. I slowed my car to a crawl, the unease returning tenfold. The fog seemed to come alive, swirling and coalescing into eerie shapes. Faces, distorted and ghostly, pressed against my car windows. They stared at me with hollow eyes, their mouths twisted into grotesque grimaces. Panic welled up inside me as I tried to rub my eyes, convinced it was a trick of exhaustion or my overactive imagination. But the faces persisted, and their mournful whispers filled the air. "Help us," they begged in unison, their voices a chilling chorus. I couldn't escape their gaze, couldn't look away from those spectral visages. They seemed trapped in a world between the living and the dead. My heart pounded, and I slammed my foot on the gas pedal, desperate to escape the fog and the haunting faces. The car lurched forward, but the fog seemed to stretch endlessly, the faces multiplying in number. They clawed at the windows, their voices growing more desperate with each passing moment. I drove faster and faster, the fog closing in on all sides. the faces pressed against the windshield, their eyes locked onto mine. I couldn't breathe, couldn't think, and then, as suddenly as it had appeared, the fog dissipated, leaving me on a deserted stretch of hollow lane. Shaken to my core, I continued to drive, my mind reeling from the otherworldly experience. I wanted nothing more than to escape this accursed road, to put as much distance between me and Hollow Lane as possible. But the road seemed to stretch on endlessly, twisting and turning in a labyrinthine maze. I couldn't find my way out. It was as if the very landscape conspired to keep me trapped on this haunted street. My gas tank was nearing empty, and I felt a growing sense of dread that I might never escape. Then, I saw it, a dilapidated, long-abandoned house looming in the distance. It was a decrepit mansion, its windows shattered and its once grand facade crumbling into ruin. Desperation pushed me toward it, as I thought perhaps I could find help or shelter there. As I entered the decaying mansion, the air inside grew heavy with an oppressive malevolence. The walls were adorned with tattered wallpaper that seemed to writhe and pulse, and the floorboards creaked beneath my feet as if protesting my intrusion. I cautiously explored the darkened interior, my flashlight revealing the remnants of a bygone era. Dust-covered furniture stood frozen in time, and cobwebs clung to every corner. The silence was broken only by the distant sound of a mournful wail that sent shivers down my spine. Then, I heard a soft, melodious voice, like a siren's song beckoning me deeper into the mansion. It was hypnotic, pulling me inexorably forward. I couldn't resist its allure, even as fear gnawed at the edges of my mind. I followed the voice through winding corridors and up a grand staircase, my footsteps echoing ominously. The voice led me to a room at the end of a long, dimly lit hallway. The door creaked open of its own accord, revealing a chamber bathed in an ethereal, bluish light. In the center of the room, a woman stood, her back turned to me. She was dressed in a flowing, white gown that seemed to shimmer with an otherworldly radiance. Her long, dark hair cascaded down her back, and she sang a haunting melody that sent chills down my spine. "Come to me," she whispered, her voice like a siren's call. I stepped closer, unable to resist her enchantment. As I reached out to touch her, she turned, and her face was a visage of deathly pallor, her eyes empty sockets filled with darkness. I stumbled back in horror, realizing that I had fallen under the spell of a malevolent spirit. The room seemed to close in around me, the walls closing in like a vice. I knew I had to escape, to break free from this nightmare. With all the strength I could muster, I turned and ran, sprinting down the corridor and back towards the front door. The mansion seemed to groan and protest my departure, as if angry at my intrusion. I burst out of the front door, gasping for breath, and stumbled into the night. The mansion loomed behind me, a dark and foreboding presence on Hollow Lane. I knew that I had narrowly escaped a fate worse than death, that the mansion and the road were both cursed, haunted by malevolent spirits. I stumbled back to my car and started it, my tires screeching as I peeled away from Hollow Lane, leaving behind the darkness and the horror that had ensnared me. I vowed never to return to that accursed road, to forget the haunting voices and the spectral faces that had tormented me. As I drove away, I couldn't help but wonder how many others had been lured by the siren's call of Hollow Lane, how many had been trapped by its malevolent spirits. I had survived, but I knew that the road would continue to claim unsuspecting victims, its haunted legacy living on in infamy. I had ventured into the realm of the supernatural that night, and I had emerged forever changed. The stories of Hollow Lane were not mere superstitions. They were a chilling reality, a nightmare that I would carry with me for the rest of my days. The night was cloaked in an eerie stillness as I drove through the winding roads that led to the forgotten village of Willowbrook. Its reputation as a haunted place had intrigued me for years, but I had always regarded such stories as mere tales to spook the curious. Little did I know that this night would shatter my skepticism forever. The moonless sky hung heavy above, casting a blanket of darkness over the surrounding woods as I made my way into Willowbrook. The journey felt surreal, the looming trees crowding the road, their gnarled branches clawing at the night. There was a sense of foreboding in the air, an unspoken warning that I couldn't ignore. The village appeared suddenly, as if it had materialized from the shadows themselves. Rows of abandoned houses stood like silent sentinels, their windows shattered and doors ajar. The very air seemed to hum with a palpable tension. As I ventured further into the heart of Willowbrook, I couldn't shake the feeling that unseen eyes were upon me. The street lamps, long forgotten by time, flickered weakly, casting eerie shadows that danced with the whispering winds. I glanced nervously at the rearview mirror, half expecting to see a spectral figure lurking in the back seat. But there was nothing there, just the empty darkness. The village square came into view, dominated by a decrepit church with a towering steeple that seemed to reach up to the heavens. Its windows were shattered, and the roof sagged under the weight of years. Stories whispered that this church was the epicenter of Willowbrook's haunting, the place where the most malevolent spirits resided. Despite my growing unease, I parked my car in front of the church. I couldn't resist the pull, the irresistible curiosity that gnawed at me. I stepped out onto the gravel road, the crunching of stones underfoot echoing in the silence. The air grew colder, and a chill crept up my spine. The church doors groaned open at my touch, revealing an interior shrouded in shadows. Pews stood in disarray, as if the congregation had fled in a hurry, leaving their faith behind. Cobwebs draped over the pews like funeral veils, and the air was thick with the scent of decay. I moved deeper into the church, drawn toward the altar like a moth to a flame. A strange, ethereal light bathed the altar in an eerie glow. Before the altar stood a figure, their back turned to me, draped in a tattered, white robe. "Who are you?" I called out, my voice quavering in the stillness. The figure didn't respond, but instead, a soft, mournful melody filled the air. It was a haunting, wordless tune that seemed to come from another world. The melody beckoned me forward, my steps guided by an inexplicable compulsion. As I drew nearer, the figure slowly turned, revealing a face obscured by long, tangled hair. The hair cascaded over their face like a funeral shroud, hiding their features. The melody grew louder, each note vibrating with an otherworldly resonance. "Please," I implored, my voice trembling, "tell me who you are." The figure raised a bony hand and extended a finger, pointing toward the altar. My heart pounded as I approached, the melody growing more intense, filling my ears until it was the only sound I could hear. On the altar lay an ancient book, its pages yellowed with age. The cover bore strange, archaic symbols that pulsed with an unnatural light. As I reached out to touch it, the symbols seemed to writhe and shift, rearranging themselves into an ominous pattern. Suddenly, the book flew open of its own accord, pages flipping rapidly until they settled on a page covered in incomprehensible script. The figure raised their head, revealing empty eye sockets that glowed with an eerie, otherworldly light. "Read," they whispered, their voice echoing in the chamber. I hesitated, fear clutching at my chest. But the compulsion was too strong, and I began to read the ancient text aloud. The words flowed from my lips like a chant, the melody intertwined with the incantation. As the last word left my mouth, a surge of energy coursed through me, and the church shook violently. The walls groaned, and the very ground seemed to tremble beneath my feet. The figure before me dissolved into a swirling vortex of darkness, and I was enveloped in a blinding light. When the light finally subsided, I found myself standing in the village square once more. But Willowbrook had changed. The houses were no longer abandoned, their windows were whole, and laughter echoed from within. The church behind me stood in all its glory, its steeple reaching for the heavens. I had unknowingly performed a ritual that had changed the fate of Willowbrook. The malevolent spirits that had haunted the village for centuries had been vanquished, their hold broken by the incantation I had recited. I returned to my car, my heart heavy with the weight of what I had done. Willowbrook was no longer haunted, but the cost of its salvation weighed on me. I had become an unwitting instrument of a supernatural force, forever tied to the village and its newfound peace. As I drove away from Willowbrook, I couldn't help but wonder if my actions had truly brought salvation to the village or if I had merely exchanged one form of haunting for another. The mysteries of that fateful night would haunt my dreams for years to come, a constant reminder of the thin line between curiosity and recklessness in the world of the supernatural.